Tractate Zevachim, page 20b, Daf Yomi, Zevachim 20b, top of the page. Kaf Amid Beis. What's the words? Bishlom. Bishlom lebayad makim la kerebi umod rebi timikros hagever ad safra lo pas lalina hamani rabihi. Assuming that these priests had all been serving the temple through the night, one can ask, granted, according to Abaya, who interprets the statement of Rabbi Yochanan in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi concedes that during the period from the rooster's crow before dawn until morning, being left overnight does not disqualify sanctification, in accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah. It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who holds that although they served through the night, the previous day's sanctification was disqualified, and they must sanctify their hands and feet again in the morning, but they may do so before dawn. Ela lerove timokim la Rabbi Elazar Shimon aval lerevi makros agever ad safra paslina hamani I Rabbi Paslalina I Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Amar afilu mikan ve'ad asara yamim eino tzarich lekadesh. But according to Rava, who interprets the statement in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, but who holds that, according to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, during the period from the rooster's crow until morning, being left overnight disqualifies sanctification, in accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah. If it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, then the priest's sanctification described therein is useless, since being left overnight disqualifies it at dawn. And if it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, doesn't he say that even if the priest continues to perform rites for the next 10 days, he does not need to sanctify his hands and feet again? If so, since the priests were serving throughout the night, they should not require sanctification. The Gemara responds, actually, the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, and here we are dealing with new priests who did not serve in the temple at night. Since they are beginning their service now, they must sanctify their hands and feet. Lina lo pasla, de lo parish, abitzki de parish asoche, masach daite, odilma, kevan yado lachzo, lo masach. A dilemma was raised before the sages. What is the halacha with regard to leaving the temple? Is it effective to disqualify sanctification of the hands and feet, such that the priest must sanctify them again when he re-enters the temple? The Gemara elaborates, if you say that being left overnight does not disqualify it, perhaps that is only because he does not separate from the temple. But when leaving the temple, where the priest separates from the temple, it is possible that the priest becomes distracted from the service. If so, he must sanctify his hands and feet again. Or perhaps, since it is in his power to return to the temple at any point, he does not become distracted, in which case he does not need to sanctify them again. Tashima akidish yelavaragla v'nidmu matbilan vein tzarich lekadesh yatzu harehein b'kadosh hasan. The Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from a Braita. If a priest sanctified his hands and feet, and his hands then became impure, he may immerse them to purify them, and he does not need to sanctify them again. If he sanctified his hands, and they If they then left the temple, they retained their sanctity. Apparently, leaving the temple does not disqualify sanctification. Yatsu yadavla kamibayalan yatsa kol gufo mai. The Gemara responds, we do not raise the dilemma with regard to a case where only his hands left the temple. In such a case, he certainly does not need to sanctify them again. When we raise the dilemma, it is with regard to a case where his entire body left the temple. What is the halacha in such a case? Tashima shelo achut yadai raglayim mikadesh bichli shares bifnim kidesh bichli shares bachutz או בכלי חול בפנים, או שטבל במי המאורה, ועבד עבודתו פסולה. טעמה דקידש בכלי שרת בחוץ, הקידש בפנים, ויצא עבודתו כשרה. The Gemara suggests, coming here another proof of a bride. One whose hands and feet are not washed must sanctify them with a service vessel inside the temple. If he sanctified them with a service vessel outside the temple, or with a non-sacred vessel inside, or if he immersed in a cave, in cave water, and performed a service, his service is disqualified. The Gemara infers the reason his service is disqualified is that he sanctified his hands and feet with a service vessel outside, but if he sanctified them inside and then left, his service is invalid. The Gemara responds, perhaps one could say, what are the circumstances of the case where one sanctified them with a service vessel outside? Is the case where he removed only his hands and placed them outside the temple and sanctified them there. Consequently, one can infer only that if he sanctified them inside and then left, meaning specifically where he removed only his hand and placed it outside, his service is valid. But with regard to a case where his entire body left the temple, you should raise the dilemma. Amar le razvila papa tashima yatsa chutz l'chilas chomas azara im l'shahos taun tvila im lefi shah taun kiddush yidan reglaim. Razvid said to Papa, coming here a proof from another brisa. In a case where a priest left the boundary of the wall of the temple courtyard, if he left long enough to retain there for a time, it requires immersion. If he left only for a moment, he requires sanctification of the hands and feet. Apparently, one who leaves even for a brief time requires sanctification. Amar le hachamaiskinan, kigon shiatsa le'asech raglav ulati mai. But Papa said to him, here we are dealing with a case where the priest left the temple to cover his legs, a euphemism for defecating or to urinate, and it is only for this reason that he must sanctify his hands and feet when re-entering the temple. The Gemara challenges, but the Mishnah Yoma 28a already teaches it explicitly. Anyone who covers his legs requires immersion afterward, and anyone who urinates requires sanctification of the hands and feet with water from the basin afterward. The Gemara responds, redundancy is undifficult. The Tana teaches the principle and then explains it again. Ta'ashima para Rabbi Chia bar Yosef amar Mikadesh b'chli shares b'fnim v'yotze Rabbi Yochanan amar afir b'chutz v'afir b'chli shares afir b'mikidash cheres. The Gemara suggests, coming here a proof from the following dispute with regard to the priest who performs the service of the red heifer, which takes place outside the temple Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef says in preparation he must sanctify his hands and feet with a service vessel inside the temple, as he must before any other service, and afterward he leaves the temple to perform the service. And Rabbi Yochanan says he may sanctify his hands even outside the temple, and even with a non-sacred vessel, and even with an earthenware bowl. Apparently, leaving the temple does not disqualify sanctification of the hands and feet. Amrav Papa Shani Para Hoid Yichol Masih B'chutz Lo Pasla B'Yitzia Yihachi Lamadi Limikadosh Ke'en Avodah Pnim. Rav Papa said the rite of the red heifer is different, since all of its acts are performed outside the temple, unlike other rites. Therefore, leaving the temple does not disqualify sanctification of the hands and feet. With regard to it, the Gemara asks, if so, why do I require the priest to sanctify his hands and feet at all for the service of the red heifer? The Gemara responds, the service of the red heifer must be similar to the service of offerings performed inside the temple. Iboilu tuma mahu shitoi likidu shidan reglaim im tim seloma yitzilu pasla de gabra chaze aval hacha de gabra lo chaze asoche maasach date o dilma Kevan tehadar chaze dak le velo masach date. A dilemma was raised before the sages. What is the halacha with regard to a priest who contracts ritual impurity during the service? Is this effective to disqualify the sanctification of his hands and feet, such that he must sanctify them again when he becomes pure? If you say that leaving the temple does not disqualify sanctification, perhaps this is because the person remains fit to serve, but here, where the person is unfit for service, perhaps he becomes distracted. Or perhaps, since he will become fit again when he becomes pure, he takes care not to become distracted. Tashima, the Gemara suggests coming here proof from a Braita. If a priest sanctifies his hands and feet and they became impure, he may immerse them, and he does not need to sanctify them again. Nit miyadav v'lo miboilan ki miboilan nit mekol gufo kol gufo tibukle kevan deboile bebed herev shemesh asoche masach date kigon ditme samuch l'shkiat chachama. The Gemara responds, we do not raise the dilemma with regard to a case where only his hands became impure. When we raise the dilemma, it is with regard to a case where his entire body became impure. The Gemara challenges, but if his entire body contracted impurity, let me derive that the sanctification is disqualified, since he needs to allow the sun to set in order to become pure after immersing, and he certainly becomes distracted in the interim. The Gemara responds, the dilemma concerns a case where he became impure adjacent to the sunset, so that he does not need to wait long after immersing and will not become distracted. Tashima para Rabbi Chia Bar Yosef amar mekadosh b'chlishoret b'pnim yotzi Rabbi Yochanan amar afilu b'chutz v'afilu b'cheichol v'afilu b'mekida shel cheres. The Gemara suggests coming here proof from the following dispute with regard to the priest who performs the rite of the red heifer. Rabbi Chia, son of Rabbi Yosef, says he must sanctify his hands and feet with a service vessel inside the temple, and afterward he leaves the temple to perform the service. And Rabbi Yochanan says he may sanctify his hands even outside of the temple, and even with a non-sacred vessel, and even with an earthenware bowl.